everyone, and thank you for joining.
Just give it 1 second. It's still connecting. I'm sorry.
There is a lag when we do this, right?
All right, we're live.
Thank you all for joining today's Stay In and Speak Out for Climate Action and Justice in Every Breath. I'm Vanessa Lynch, the Pennsylvania Field Organizer for Moms Clean Air Force. Moms Clean Air Force's Pennsylvania chapter is a community of over 100,000 moms and dads united against air pollution and committed to fighting for climate safety to protect our children's health. As parents, we care deeply about climate change and want action from our elected officials. Moms are uniting to make this issue a top priority. Even in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, our work continues virtually as we meet with our elected officials at all levels of government throughout the year. Climate change is real. It's happening now, and it threatens the health of our children. As a mom, I consider it part of my job to protect my children from climate change. I'm deeply concerned that we're running out of time to do something about this crisis. Moms are fierce protectors of our children's health, and we know that air pollution and climate change harm our kids. That's why we're uniting to demand a solution to the climate crisis. Right now, we're watching the living breath being taken from Black people over and over again in so many different ways. Communities of color are bearing the brunt of police brutality as well as the COVID crisis. And these same communities breathe significantly more air pollution than others. It's time for all of us to work toward justice in every breath. I want to welcome my co-hosts for today's event. Sitting next to me is my son, Gavin. Gavin, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gavin. I'm 11 years old. I like to ride my bike, read, dance, and hang out with my friends. I am excited to be here and show how kids can help make an impact on climate change.
Thanks, Gavin. Also joining me today are Mollie, Michael, and her daughter, Zeta.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. Thank you, Vanessa, for having us tonight. My name is Mollie Michael. I'm a mom in southeastern Pennsylvania, where I live with my husband and 2 daughters. And I'm also program manager for Moms Clean Air Force. And tonight I am joined by my daughter, Zeta, who's going to tell you a little bit about herself as well.
Hi, my name is Zeta. I am 9 years old and in the 4th grade. I like to go to my circus class on Saturdays and play with my friends. I'm excited to be here because I like talking to elected leaders to figure about how we can fix climate change.
Thanks, ladies. Now I'd like to introduce Senator Muth, representing Senate District 44. We are so happy to have such an amazing climate champion join us and help us understand what's going on in Pennsylvania. Senator Muth?
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of this event and for including me. I don't think anyone is unaware of the fact that the climate crisis is one of the biggest crises facing us right now, even ahead of COVID-19. I'm hopeful that maybe we can learn to fight both of these things at the same time so that one focus isn't shifted from the other. But as we navigate through this landscape, as a new legislator, it's been incredibly frustrating to see the lack of political will within the state legislature and the administration to just take basic common sense steps to protect Pennsylvanians from pollution harm, from toxic waste, from fossil fuel operators. And these impacts of the harm that this causes is really intersectional. And just because we might not frack here in Philadelphia doesn't mean that we don't deal with the impacts of that. And knowing that the state of Pennsylvania has a long history of legacy pollution, we have a big battle ahead of us to make real change in a really timely manner, because we know time is of the essence with the climate crisis. And so to see Gavin and Zeta on here as 2 young, very involved people gives me hope, because I think they are certainly believers in science, which I appreciate. And maybe you should inject some of that knowledge and enthusiasm into the state legislature, because it would be amazing to work with people like you that were elected officials instead of some of my current colleagues that unfortunately are bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. So when we talk about public health, environmental health, environmental justice, all of these things connect to one another. And there's also a fiscal and economic side to it, that we're losing money and we are not in an economic sustainable place right now, not just because of COVID, but because of the boom and bust cycles that our Commonwealth has, favored for so long. So I look forward to talking to you for the rest of this event and working together moving forward.
Thank you, Senator. We actually have your first question is from my daughter, Zeta, one of the future, hopefully, science believers that may come to the General Assembly in a few years. So I'll let Zeta ask her first question.
When the weather is hot, kids like me can't play outside. And when bad air days happen, it can be hard to breathe, especially for my friends who have asthma. How should we be working on to fix climate change in Pennsylvania?
It's a great question. Step one, in my opinion, would be to let's actually monitor the air quality in Pennsylvania in a efficient, data-informed manner. That's something that we currently don't do, and we should be doing and should have been doing to see what's going on. So you should be able to Google your air quality no matter where you are, not waiting for data that's 3 weeks behind, and be able to see that. Secondly, let's hopefully get to a place where if you could Google that data in a time efficient way in real time, you would find that it's not bad. So for that to happen, we really need to have an overhaul of Pennsylvania's regulations to actually not just be enforced, but strengthened, both with carbon emissions, anything that is, adding to air pollution. We need to be looking at solutions, both with transportation, with energy industry, to reduce all of these carbon emissions, methane, all of it. Unfortunately, we're seeing the opposite happen. And so that's why you can't play outside in the summer, because unfortunately, there's not enough political will for us to tackle this when it's really not that big of a lift. And I certainly can, as someone who worked in sports medicine, understand the inhaler and the asthma issue and how that impacts, not just your ability to play outside, but your ability to have, a clean and free airway and just to be able to function on hot summer days. And so this is certainly an achievable goal to combat, but we need the oomph behind us in the legislature. So hopefully, Zeta, you can start writing some postcards to some of those elected officials.
That's right. I'm sure we'll have that as a project over our next break. So you talked about air pollution and public health, and as a mom, it's this terrible choice to have to make. Do I let the kids go outside? Do I keep them in? And that's not even about being in contact with COVID, right? It's just everyday choices that we have to make as parents because of our air quality, and because we know and science tells us that air quality or air pollution and climate change harms our health. And however, mainstream scientists, their expertise is being set aside in order to discount the severity of climate change and air pollution. So I wanted to ask you how we can ensure that scientific knowledge and public health professionals form the basis of Pennsylvania's approach to climate change and public health protections, rather than what it seems like the current situation is. The loudest voices and the most powerful voices aren't health professionals, but they are corporate polluters and special interests. So how do you think that the best way to handle that and to fight that here in the state?
So I think step one is campaign finance reform, and Pennsylvania has some of the weakest campaign finance reform. So that's just any industry, not just polluters and fossil fuel corporate powers that just totally demolish our democracy, and people are bought and paid for. And so I say this in the sense that I don't want to dog on any of my colleagues in the sense that especially those who, running for office is hard. And so I know that myself and some of the people that came in 2018 defied these odds as non-political, not coming up in a political family, not being wealthy, I have student loan debt. And so you're fundraising, trying to run for office. And now it's like we're in, and I didn't take any special interest money, which is really, I'm the only person in the Senate that can say that. So that's how odd it is. But there's no cap on campaign contributions in Pennsylvania. So if, you know, the PA Energy Alliance, whatever the PAC's name is, just dumps a check, they can write a check for however much they want. And so think about what we're up against as we the people, where they spend millions, tens of millions of dollars on lobbying in Harrisburg. And they're in the hallways, they're there all the time, right? And so how do we the people have a presence if we're up against dark money? And so that would be my first thing in terms of just flat out changing how the system is funded. But secondly is that, you know, when we have these, one of the things I didn't really, I guess, fully understand, and maybe because I was focused on trying to win my Senate seat, but was that we had to, as a senator, you confirm all these appointments. And so, you know, there's this mindset of everybody should be a 50-0 vote, and it's unanimous by both sides of the aisle. And that's this play on we're bipartisan. And then you find out some of the judges that you're voting on are not people you would want making decisions on our lives and our livelihoods. And then you also find out that some of the people that are on the Public Utility Commission or people that are on the different environmental boards are straight out of the fossil fuel industry. And so there's really no conflict of interest, ethical divide that keeps some of that out. So I think strengthening those is really important. My team and I have dabbled into, can we elect secretaries instead of having them appointed by the governor, because you would like to think, and so we've dabbled into how do we make this more like based on your qualifications versus on who you knew and who could get you in somewhere. And so if, you know, that is something certainly that we have to be more honest about and talk about why some of these regulators that are taxpayer funded don't even enforce the weak rules that we do have. And so, like I mentioned before, one of the easiest bills is just to monitor air and water quality. So we just actually introduced a memo today that was based on the Attorney General's grand jury report, which was one of his recommendations, which is like low hanging fruit. This isn't radical. This isn't some crazy, you know, quote unquote tree hugging, like whatever they're gonna fear monger us in. This is just basic data on air and water quality, especially near areas where there's fossil fuel industry, right? And how do we use that data to show the science and make those decisions? We don't have a single risk assessment for any of these permits for these projects that include a public health risk assessment, not one. So I think that's something that certainly can be strengthened in terms of bringing in experts that are going to look at where we're at and where we need to be and what does that look like. Zeta, do you have a question? Go ahead, do it.
I think Gavin has the next question.
Oh, okay.
She's whispering in my ear, but Gavin has the next question.
All right, Gavin.
So one of my best friends has asthma. Because we live with fracking in our community, I worry about him and how the air pollution from fracking could affect his breathing. What are you doing to clean up our air?
That's a great question. I just mentioned the one about monitoring our air quality and water quality, which was out of the grand jury report on fracking. I also have a companion bill with State Representative Austin Davis. Our bill's SB 967, and it increases fines for those major facilities that pollute our air. And also requires a municipal notification system. So one of the things that I'm learning as a new legislator is what you think exists does not. So common sense things like, hey, your township should tell you if there's, you know, some sort of air quality issue, or the state should, or there should be an alert system if there's a pipeline leak. And those things do not exist. It's actually at the discretion of the operator reporting it to the state. I don't know about you, I'm a little suspect of having the entity that makes big bucks in our state report that they're having issues. I don't think there's an honest system in place there. So having those safeguards that you get that information, again, in real time, is where we can start seeing when this is happening, and then enforcing regulations. So you're absolutely right, Gavin, where we see kids that are typically growing up in lower income families. Look at Marcus Hook in Philadelphia. The air quality there is terrible. you know, people work 2 jobs. How are they going to go to a local municipal meeting to fight against permits and even be aware of them, you know, being up for a vote? They don't stand a chance up against the fossil fuel industry. They can't even make a living wage. And so kids are stuck. People are stuck with the circumstances around them. And so same thing with out in Pittsburgh, near the coke plant for the steelworks. It's, again, there's a way to still do, you know, I'm actually a firm believer that we are in a place now, both from an environmental crisis standpoint and a market standpoint, that we need to begin our transition to green energy. We need jobs and we need to clean up PA. And that is the single pathway. So when people panic about banning fracking, you know, we need to begin this transition. We need to. These are not endless resources as much as industry may try to sell it that way. And we need to prepare people for transition where they get job training so that they don't work at these polluters anymore. And then when they leave our communities, there's cleanup. And these, you know, people aren't left in neighborhoods and communities that literally leave behind the waste that made them sick and is still polluting the air and water long after they're you know, out of town and didn't clean up after themselves. So you are certainly very right. Some of the places you can spot on the map in Pennsylvania, look where industry has planted its roots, and look who lives around it. And it's people that can't, they don't have a chance to get out.
So for the last 10 or 15 years, Pennsylvanians have been suffering the impacts of the unconventional oil and gas industry, otherwise known as fracking. And Gavin and I live in a residential community with a fracking well pad. We're in the southwestern part of the state. And 1.5 million people in Pennsylvania live within a half mile of oil and gas facilities. The primary component of natural gas is methane, and methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, which the oil and gas industry is emitting at a rate of about 1.1 million tons per year MPA. So what are you doing to decrease methane release from the oil and gas industry in Pennsylvania?
Well, I'm certainly among a handful of us that are advocating for increased state protections, because as you know, the federal EPA just rolled back some of these emission regulations, which is shameful. And it's really criminal. It's not just shameful, it's criminal. It's an attack on people's health and well-being. It's, again, being defenseless at an entity with power that's supposed to designed to protect people. And so, you know, when you think about these things, in my mind, and I'm not the governor, my approach would be far more not just reactive to what happens federally, but proactive. And that let's set our goals. I don't want to hear about 2050 and like, we need goals that are urgent, time framed, and we need to be hitting those metrics. And right now, this state is number 2 in the nation for natural gas production. Think about what we're emitting in emissions. I mean, I grew up in Western PA. So I grew up in Westmoreland County, and I lived there for the first 20 years of my life. And then I actually went back and visited the fracking tour last Thanksgiving with Lois, who I know is a member of this group, and took my dad, you know, and my dad's lived there his whole life, and looking at a new pipeline being built next to coal waste that was never cleaned up. And you just look at this and it's like, this doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. And so we have a lot of work to do, but this work is actually really doable. It's just those in power, they don't have that same urgency as some of us do that are really fighting this fight. And we need to talk about this with other people that don't know what we know. And that is how we build the power within communities all over Pennsylvania. People just assume that some of these things are in place. Like I said myself, you think, oh, who oversees that? Don't like departments communicate with one another? Isn't there a second, you know, isn't there a double check over industry when they report? Nope. That doesn't exist. And so that's how you get that shock value of getting people to understand that not only is your air polluted from methane, go look at what's in your water and how we don't have well water standards. And so just giving people these things, these facts that kind of just like shake your brain and think, I didn't know that. I thought this was in place. We need everybody to advocate to their state legislators, because there's a lot of power at the state level that we can we have to have the minimum of a federal regulation. We can expand it to be better, and we need to do that.
Well, and I think Senator Zeta has a question for you in a second, but I wanted to hit hard on a point you made about reporting and what emissions really are, and industry self-reports. So when we say, or Vanessa said, 1.1 million tons per year, that's like what we're told, not what we know that may or may not be true. I'm sure it's much, much more. And also you mentioned building power, and that's just really what we at Moms have been trying to do, and educating not only our communities, which Vanessa does a lot of in her part of the state, I do a lot of out here, but also educating legislators. Not everybody is like you who actually knows or believes this to be true. And even if they might believe it, they haven't been told, they don't necessarily know. So it's just you made some really valuable points there. And I will let Zeta ask the next question, but thank you.
Black, brown, and poor kids breathe more air pollution because of where many of them. What are you doing to protect them?
So we have been talking a lot about, what does a transition to a green economy look like pre-COVID? And some of those conversations have evolved since COVID. And so we're seeing what the air quality and respiratory issues that Black and brown people are predisposed to from geographic location, from genetic things that where their family has grown up in these areas as well. Now we're seeing them get hit by a respiratory virus that we don't have a cure for. And so we're seeing how vulnerable this population is, and how they also struggle, from a statistical standpoint, to have access to resources, to quality healthcare, to be able to make a living wage, all of these things. And they live in these areas where industry, again, we're relying on the operator to report. And we were talking about what does a post-COVID Pennsylvania look like, because my team and I are not a real big fan of the word "let's go back to normal," because we didn't like the quote unquote normal. Normal pre-COVID was still really messed up and was still really unfair and unjust. And there needs to be a different mindset coming out of this, where we really look to take care of each other, and really look to industry to be responsible entities in our Commonwealth, that they're not just looking for the bottom dollar amount, that if you want to do business here, you don't disrespect the people, the land, the air, and the water, and you clean up after yourself. And so what does that look like? And it's not just an energy specific transition, that's a huge part of it, but also what entities are going to phase out because of COVID, what industries are not going to have the jobs, and where do we need to lift people up, and what does retraining look like? And that is a really big intervention of going into these local communities and asking them what they need. And so I can assess data and look to see that this would be a great thing, but Representative Amarato and I have really pushed this. Go into these places, ask them what they need, because the needs are different, and they need to be heard as a part of this conversation and what they and their families are struggling with. And then, yes, there are plenty of great experts, and the Just Transition Fund, it's a national organization. They've been very helpful in us navigating this, but we're also like, there's a racial component of this, a racial equity and justice component of this, where we don't want to move forward into this transition without ensuring that they are all on board and a part of it as well, and not just left behind like they've been. And so that has been a really big part of the last 6 months of my legislative life, of just reading and learning how we can make that be a reality. And part of our legislation is for an Office of Just Transition, which includes members of all stakeholder communities, local communities, that they have a seat at the table to develop how this looks and what needs to be built in. We need safety nets for people. If you're going to get retrained or trained in general for any job or educated, and you have financial responsibilities, whether it's a family, bills, whatever, you can't be unemployed while you're trying to work your way into a new career. Those are the programs that fail. So how do we get supports in place? Childcare, healthcare, transportation, all of those things come into play when we talk about lifting up the communities that have been left behind. And that's a heavy lift, but again, it's a doable one. Pennsylvania is primed and ready to be a part of the green economy, and the job potential there for everyone to benefit is huge.
Yeah, thank you for that, Senator. And you made some you know, it's clear we can't go back to the status quo, right? And this pandemic has laid bare so many of the inequities and the way all of the inequities in our society intersect to create social injustice, environmental injustices, inequities in education with kids in remote learning. It's just all, you know, out on the table for everyone to see. And, you know, I appreciate you working to make sure that we don't go back to the status quo, because it's clear that that wasn't working even before this. But so I have a question about something that the Governor Wolf has been working toward and has faced some opposition to, which is to link Pennsylvania to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. People call it RGGI for those of you watching. So if you hear RGGI, it's not a person, it's a thing that is going to work to decrease carbon dioxide emissions from the energy sector, which would also limit air pollution and combat climate change. And how do you think Pennsylvania joining this initiative would help, and how would it impact Pennsylvania families?
You know, it's an interesting thing to sort of have watched over the past couple of months, how RGGI was ballooned into this like massive radical thing. And like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an important step and it would be very helpful for us to be a part of, but in turn, it alone does not fix our problems. And so I'm very careful in my messaging on that, because I think because it was made such a big deal that I don't want the public to think that like, oh, we're in RGGI and now we have a climate plan. You know, RGGI just really is a way for us to contain some of these emissions and be a part of the other states. So I certainly was surprised at that, and I'm still very worried about what the actual conditions of our agreement into RGGI will end up being as they are still being developed in terms of what that looks like, because a watered down RGGI is not helpful. And so we did get, you know, we got the ball rolling, but we don't want, you know, the ball to roll down the hill and we can't find it again. Like we need a real agreement that actually has teeth. And so I'm very concerned just because of how quickly I've seen anything to do with environmental change for the better get squashed. You know, we're in a state where there's bills to allow all pollutant dumping without reporting in Commonwealth waterways. Like that's a bill of the chairman of the majority party of the Senate Environmental Committee. So like, when we think, I guess RGGI is pretty radical to them that there's such pushback because they'd rather just dump all the toxic waste into the river and not tell anybody, even though now we allow it, we just, again, rely on self-reporting. So I think for me, the RGGI part is a really big step in the right direction. And I was a little bit stunned, to be honest, when we tried to add some amendments in that were RGGI related in the Senate, and unfortunately the majority leader of the Senate called the question, which meant we were no longer allowed to debate the bill. And that's the second time that's happened to me in the Senate. And so that's how you know it really hits a nerve, right? That we can't even talk about a basic initiative that other states around us have already been a part of. That is just one step in the right direction. And I encourage people to still pay attention to the development of what our RGGI agreement looks like as it develops, so that you know, the environmental board is listening, because some of the people on there are certainly, some are concerned me that maybe they're not focused on the environment. So we want a good RGGI agreement, not a watered down one.
People use plastic all the time. There are plastic water bottles, plastic bags, plastic toys, and plastic garbage outside everywhere. I have a reusable water bottle that I use instead of disposable plastic water bottles. What are you doing to get rid of all this plastic?
Gavin, you're a good dude, because I have about 7 reusable water bottles that I end up all leaving in one place, and then so I'm trying to be as good of a citizen as you are, and that's one step, right? And so I think the more I've learned about recycling and the lack of the market for recycling, I think we've been duped on that for quite some time, that we were all doing our due diligence, rinsing out our cans and our bottles and putting them out to be collected. And so you're right, we have to have a talk about the way we live. and what we use and expend as humans, and where does that go? It's not just the carbon footprint, but what plastics do we need? How do we make, if we need plastics for certain things, how do we make it the most reusable? How do we actually develop that? And so what we do know is that, I have a giant pipeline plowing through Senate District 44 that is going to ship natural gas liquids overseas to make plastics. And so the market is there for it. And the regulations to protect us from the harms of how they transport it do not exist. So you're absolutely right. I mean, this is, it's a societal shift. There's a trash problem everywhere, and plastic just sits in the landfill. And so it's a little bit overwhelming to think about that, because then you realize that at some of those landfills, then they just dump toxic, waste on top of it from fracking. And so that is so overwhelming, and it's like, how do we combat this? And it's really by, again, if you have controls and regulations that are enforced and they're meaningful, you wouldn't be able to have all of these pipelines all over Pennsylvania, because we know that the environmental harm has nowhere been near measured. And so, do we need to be transporting natural gas liquids to make more plastics? I'm going to say no. And so for me, it is certainly, there's the societal part of better habits and being more resourceful and mindful of what you're using and how you live your life to be a better human on this planet. And then there's the industry side of it, where we certainly need to enforce regulations. And even glass, I mean, you think glass, I had no idea that you can't melt down colors of glass that are different and combine them together. And so there's this, I mean, we stopped recycling glass in Harrisburg. So when I leave Harrisburg, I take all my glass home and put it in my recycle bin, because you can't recycle it there, and it's because of the sorters. So they're just simple things like, can we go back to glass so that it can be melted down and reused? Like, sure. But there are ways to make this work. But again, what's the bottom dollar? And we're always up against the bottom dollar. And I think, again, it's a change we can make. It's the will's not there yet.
Well, I think that is our time for tonight, but I just want to say thank you to Senator Muth for sharing some amazing ideas about what we can be doing in Pennsylvania, and thank all of you who chose to join our Stay In and Speak Out event today. I appreciate the help of Mollie and our two young voices, Zeta and Gavin, and what we really are hoping for is an engaged and powerful set of advocates, from our youngest constituents to our moms, all working together to help protect our children's health and decrease air pollution. And we love elected officials like Senator Muth, who make this such an important issue and understand its value to moms and kids. So thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you, Senator. Thanks, Vanessa and Gavin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.